All right, we are live now with Paul Carcaterra. Welcome, everyone. It's Monday, April 27th. Welcome to the Elevate Academy. This is a place where everyone who loves sports, especially student athletes, their parents, their families, just lovers of sports, we can all get together and we bring on some incredible guests. And today we have Paul Carcaterra. We're going to spread the love for sports and keep everyone elevated during this time. For those of you who may not know, let me give you a quick background on Paul. Paul's a ESPN announcer. He is one of the key people in ESPN's lacrosse coverage. He's done the national championship so many times. He always has the big games. He's also made a name for himself in college reporting for football, and he's done a lot of college football in the last few years. He also hosts the Overtime podcast for US Lacrosse. He won a national championship for Syracuse University in 1995, where he was an All-American midfielder as well. Paul, welcome to the Academy. How you doing, bud?
Thank you. You know, it's good to see a live button on the top left, too. It just kind of creates a little bit more blood flow for me and the sense of urgency. So I like that. I'm doing a lot of recorded pieces these days, but live gets me going.
Well, I love it because, this time of year, man, you would be all over the place traveling, getting ready for games, doing some big games. Have you actually looked at your old calendar? Like, where would you be, this past weekend?
100%. And the last few weeks have been really tough for me because a lot of these games, when I would circle them in the beginning of the season, I put them in my calendar, but I'm kind of like adding to the sorrow of this time. But I think it's good to kind of reflect and think about these things because it's kind of captured some of the emotion behind sports too. Because when I look at the games, I also affiliate the games and the matchups, especially these last couple of weeks, with the players who would have had senior days. So those have been really
Right.
tough ones for me. Like if I know Hopkins is playing Maryland and it's the last regular season game for Hopkins at Homewood, right away I think about the seniors, or if it's at the Dome in Syracuse or down in Duke and Durham or Carolina Chapel Hill, Virginia, Charlottesville. So I see them and I kind of match the senior class. And I think of the journey of these athletes. And, for me, I've always thought of my journey and I try to connect the two and how special it was and how special my senior year was. And I had that feeling of finality in a good way. I knew it was the last. I could prepare myself for it. My family could help me prepare for it. And I just feel so much compassion for these athletes, the men and the women who've fought so hard over these years to get to this point that they don't have is really tough.
Yeah, it's hard because I'll tell you, I'm still coaching high school and, I had to do a session the other day called Titan Talk, and they asked me to bring on 3 of my seniors to talk about what they're going through right now. And, I think it's even, it's just as hard for those kids who are seniors in high school who are, they're missing out on their prom and those
Yeah.
Whether there's going to be a graduation, they're going to be able to walk and, with a cap and gown and all those things. It's hard for everyone. It's tough. This is unprecedented times.
Yeah, it's the rite to passage. I mean, when you're a young kid, you just assume that when you get to the point in life, you're going to have a senior day on a field with your family. You're going to have the prom. You're going to have the graduation. And then all of a sudden, your world and everyone else's world gets turned upside down. I think the positive of all this is it's not just one group that's being affected by this. It's not just student athletes had
Right.
their world stop and the rest of the world is going. We're all in this together, as cliche as it sounds, but more importantly, we can kind of grieve together and we know the person next to us has a story just like ours, right? I could feel bad for myself right now that I'm not calling games and I'm not traveling to capture some of the great moments in lacrosse in 2020. But for me, I look at the person next to me at a grocery store that might own a restaurant or that has a family business that hasn't been operating for weeks. And it's a really, really troubling time. But the only sense of comfort that I get is we're truly in this together, and you could share people's pain and sorrow and hopefully, continue to tell stories. And I think we're all going to come out of this very differently. Obviously, there's all the health differences in regards to the way that we're going to live our lives. But I really think we're going to live our lives with way more compassion. Are you going to yell at that guy that by accident cut you off. I think we're really going to start thinking about our lives and how fragile society is. So you have to have some compassion. You have to understand what people are going through, because when the lights do eventually get turned on, life isn't going to be like it was. And you have to understand people are going to come with more struggle, and people are going to come with more issues and problems. And I think that's the most important thing for all of us to understand, is this is not going to be easy, even when the lights turn on. And we're all going to need just a little bit more support for each other.
Yeah, I was watching an interview last night, and it was interesting. They asked someone, they said, what do you think, the rest of 2020 going to 2021 is going to hold as compared to 2019? He said, we're not going to see 2019 again in that same capacity, because this is all changing us so much. And he said the same thing you said. Hopefully it's going to be something that's going to be for good. And, that's going to be a key thing. But there's a lot that has to happen between now and then. I was listening to the radio this morning, and, different states obviously are opening up. New Jersey just opened up some of their parks, and things are happening. So hopefully we can get back to a more normal way of life. But the word normal is going to look a lot differently as we go forward in post COVID-19. So, but let's talk a little bit of lacrosse. And one of the things I right before we got on the air, I was saying to Paul, he does an unbelievable podcast, and you have to, if you are a lacrosse fan. I know we have a lot of other fans on here, but if you're a lacrosse fan, you have got to listen to his two most recent podcasts on the Overtime Podcast with US Lacrosse, where he interviews Dave Petramala and Gary Gate, two of the greatest players of all time at their individual positions. And boy, did I just get completely touched. And I played against both of those guys. They were both my era, but wow, unbelievable interviews you had with them.
I really appreciate it. For me, you mentioned the lacrosse aspect of it, and covering other sports too. The podcast for me is all about storytelling. And there's not a lot of X's and O's, but I try to capture the journey of someone's life, and all of the individuals, whether they're male or female. The common denominator is they're affiliated with the sport of lacrosse in some capacity, whether it's a great player like Gary Gates or Dave Petramala, or if it's a person who played in college and now has a significant role in terms of ownership in sports leagues, like a Joe Tsai or a Chris Hogan, who plays in the National Football League and has won multiple Super Bowls, but played lacrosse at Penn State and not football. So the common denominator obviously is lacrosse. But for me, it's all about the story. We don't really talk about the X's and O's. I try to capture the journey of this individual, the people in his or her life that had major impacts in regards to who they are today. Their struggles too, because for me, I think it's really important. I'm a vulnerable person. I tell people exactly how I live my life and what's hard for me as a person or a parent. It's not as glorious as everyone thinks a lot of times. Do I have an unbelievable situation in life? Yes, unequivocally. But the reason I'm able to appreciate those things and be really grateful every time I do my job is because I also know life's not that easy. I've had family members like my mother who struggled through cancer and eventually passed away. I have a 12-year-old son who's autistic and is, struggles in school and has learning disabilities and one-to-one aids in class. So I take all those things and I'm very transparent about it. But I feel like with the podcast, if I could tap into the individuals and not only talk about what's great in his or her life, but the struggles. And the reason why I like to do that, and I don't go in every podcast saying to myself, I want to find this person's struggles. But if you understand that every person's had peaks and valleys, there's a message in there. There's something that person can say or do in his or her life that helps other people. And it gives some inspiration. And you understand, for example, Dave Petramala. I spoke to him on my podcast just a few days after he mutually parted ways with Johns Hopkins. That is a tough moment for an individual. He's the greatest player in Johns Hopkins history. He's also the winningest coach in Johns Hopkins history. So you have the best player, and from a record standpoint, the best coach who's got national titles, and all of a sudden he wakes up one day and they mutually part ways. So that's a lot to handle for someone. So you have to give that person a platform to talk and to feel comfortable.
Well,
And we all walk away.
Yeah, I've known Dave. I've known Dave since ninth grade. So we played against each other in ninth grade. You covering lacrosse now. The big rivalry is Chaminade versus St. Anthony's on Long Island in the Catholic League, and that's always a battle. But back when we were playing, it was a big league. And my sophomore year, Dave didn't even play our sophomore year. He went back to playing baseball.
Yeah, he mentioned that. It's crazy on the podcast.
Yeah, and we lost to, here's what's crazy. We lost to St. Mary's in 4 overtimes, and Paul Schmoller was on attack.
Wow. Wasn't Matt Panetta involved in those
teams? No. Panetta was at Elmont. He's coaching.
He was at Elmont. That's right. Yes, he coaches there. Yes.
But I mean, what a team that they had. I mean, and then their junior year, Dave came back. Their defense was incredible. Brian McCormick, who went on to play at Cornell. Dave, you had Schmoller back in goal. They were an unbelievable team. And then you had St. Anthony's, and it was just unbelievable. But so literally knowing Dave, I got to know Dave really well through 2 mutual friends, Chris and Peter Pace. Peter, who played with me at Chaminade, and he went on to play at Yale, and got to know Dave really well. And that's the most I've ever heard Dave speak.
I have a really good relationship with him. Yeah, I have a great relationship with him. He recruited my brother Brian at Johns Hopkins when he was an assistant coach. When I was younger, I was working the camps with Brian at Johns Hopkins, and he was running with Tony Seaman. So I got to know him, and I was younger back then, and I was kind of a wise guy, and I used to kid around with him a lot. And we kind of just, we opened up and to each other. And I'll tell you what, I said it on the podcast, I never played for Dave Petramala, but I've always looked at him in regards to looking up to someone, and he was like a coach in my life, and to some capacity I think he would say the same about me. I've given him some feedback and some ideas, and just have given him perspective. I would hope that maybe not every single person has too. We just developed this good relationship, but I think for me, when I did the podcast with him, it was a very, very hard time for him emotionally, and I just wanted to give him an opportunity to talk.
And boy, did he ever. And I got to tell you, I was literally totally drawn into that podcast. It was phenomenal. And just listening to Dave, I'll tell you one quick great Dave story. We got together one time. We were doing a pickup game at East Meadow High School. And he's from Hicksville. I'm from East Meadow, one town away. And a bunch of us just went down there to play pickup. And there was a kid by the name of Craig Lundy, who was I don't know if he was an All-American, but he was definitely a star for Yale at the time. And Petro literally strips Lundy of the ball, picks up the ball. We were playing 6-on-6. We each had a half field. Strips the ball and then flips it back to him. And I was in goal. I was a goalie back then. And I was like, ooh, he just flipped him the ball back. And then he went again, and he went over his head, and that lefty over the head,
the ball.
Swoop you, yeah. Flipped it back to him again.
Oh, my God.
And Lundy just took the ball, rolled it down, and just walked over and grabbed some water. I go, I think we're done.
Yeah.
And it was amazing just watching him play. We got to play against each other in the North-South game, which I will say we did win. We beat those guys on his home turf at Hopkins in '89.
Oh, that's great.
But then your podcast with Gary Gate. So Gary and I, we played against each other, with each other, good friends. And my takeaway from the Gary Gate podcast was, as a young kid, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, their coaches were talking to them about visualization techniques.
Yeah, back in 1979, right? No one was doing that. But
blew me away.
You know Gary Gate, he's just a different mind. And he said also something that we thought was really interesting. On top of in 1979 being a 10 or 11-year-old who's visualizing and meditating back in Canada playing box lacrosse. I mean, that's 30 years ahead of the times. But more importantly too, it's just his perspective. He talked about his life and unexpected turns, and how he wants to kind of equate it to him, the lacrosse shooter. And what I mean by that is he never wants to just shoot the ball in the top left corner. It's about variety and changing things up and having the instincts to throw a fake one way, depending on how the goalie approaches you, and you really hear those things, but you believe it too if you watched him play his whole life and you watch him coach, and you talk to his players. I mean, Michelle Tumalo is a great lacrosse player in the last World Cup in women's lacrosse for Team USA. Yeah, she was an MVP, and like Gary Gait, is someone she played for 4 years at Syracuse. Like, the impact he's had on her as a player, and now she's a coach at a Division I school. Like,
I'll give you another one. Jen Adams.
Gary's everywhere. Yeah,
Jen Adams.
Yeah, of course.
When I first started coaching girls lacrosse, I was friends with Jen, and I said to Jen, "All right, Jen, I'm now coaching my daughters in girls lacrosse. What should I teach them?" And she said, "I'll tell you exactly what you should teach them. Anything that you would teach the boys, because Gary Gait taught me everything that he would do." And he just said, this is how you should be playing. It wasn't, he didn't differentiate between the two.
Yeah, I mean, when you think of Gary Gait, he's the Michael Jordan of our sport, but he's had his hands on more aspects of the game than anyone combined. And when I say that, I mean this. If you watch the way he played, when he arrived on the scene in 1987, his freshman year at Syracuse, he was just different. I know there were some Canadians who were playing field lacrosse in the United States college ranks before him, but him and his twin brother Paul were just totally different. Their ability to throw behind the back full field passes, and their creativity, and the field was a canvas, and it was a blank canvas that Coach Simmons just allowed them to explore, and you saw it. But he influenced the generations below him tenfold. Like, everything that we see today, if Gary Gait never played lacrosse, like, I'm not convinced we would see it, because he lit a fire for the Powells, and the Powells lit a fire for the Thompsons, and it just kind of trickled down, and it all started with Gary Gait. But more importantly, if you think about what he's done also, like Maryland women's lacrosse, when he arrived on College Park's campus down in Maryland in the earlier 90s, Kelly Amante Hiller was playing for him. Like, he influenced her. And then the Jen Adams of the world, Kathy Reese, who's won, 12 national titles. Like, those are all, his fingerprints. Yeah, but Gary's done it at the men's. He's won MLL championships. He was a player coach for Canada when they won in 2006. What he's done for the sport outside of just playing, but his mind and his creativity is clearly unmatched.
Yeah, no, I love it. He's definitely just a different thinker. He really is. And so I would tell everyone, you gotta check that out. But, staying on the lacrosse side of things, yesterday I was on a Zoom call with the IWCLA board and a bunch of coaches, along with, college coaches, club coaches, high school coaches, et cetera, talking about, what's going on and how is this summer going to look like. You're out there, you're in the business, obviously. Do you think this summer we are going to have tournaments? Is there going to be recruiting this summer? Any gut check on that one?
I honestly, depends what day you ask me, and I have no inside information, and no one does. I mean, we're all going to have to react based on the state, the local, and the federal government. And I think how it's rolled out in these phases, and how promising things happen during those phases. I'm not an expert on this, but when I read about this stuff, it's, they introduce a phase and then they want to see how that phase reacts, right? And if you have positive trends during the 14-day period, you'll move on to the next stage. So I don't really have a clue if it's going to happen. Obviously, I would like to see it happen, but I would also say that however we've seen it in the past, like you mentioned, 2019, we're not going to see it as 2019. I would say that it would be modified at best, right? I mean, you'd have to see drastic changes in regards to what summer lacrosse, in this case, looked like in the past. It's not going to look the same. There'll be major modifications if it all happens, and we need to be prepared for that. But I think the next few weeks are really pivotal, because from my understanding, when I read and I watch television and I listen to the experts, when these phases are rolled out, it's all about how the people react to these phases and if there's additional spikes. So if the phase is rolled out and things are great, then we can move to the next one. But I think it's like the whole mindset right now that I have is something I try to abide to when we're going through anything in life. It's like crawl, walk, run. Like if eventually we want to run, we have to open up first and have to see how we react when we crawl. If that goes well, we'll walk. And then if we're walking well, we'll run. But like for me, I don't speculate, and I try not to, because like so much of this in the beginning just like, was so emotional for me, because I was like, when you first heard like the NESCAC was canceling, then the Ivy, you're like, okay, you're hoping that they're going to be like the Big Ten and the ACC and all this.
No way the ACC is going to do it.
yeah, exactly. So it's like it was so emotional, and there were so many letdowns in terms of you just clinging on. So like I'm trying not to do that, and I'm trying to just have a positive attitude. But I do know that if it all happens, it's going to look very different.
Yeah, no. Well, listen, the one thing I'm actually also, because, I have so many kids that, I coach, and, I'm just hoping for some type of normalcy, and we have to push things back. The one thing I think that's very important, and Ricky Fried said this, head coach at Georgetown, former head coach at Team USA, he said it yesterday. He said, specifically to the 2021s and 22s, if you're 21 and you haven't been recruited yet, there's still going to be time. There's still going to be time. There's still coaches who are going to need players to fill those spaces. And the 22s, they're still going to need those players. Everyone's working under the same, circumstances.
Exactly. And like you said, like you said just there, you have to connect it to something I said earlier. If you recall, I mentioned that there's something comforting in regards to knowing the person next to you, to the left and the right, are going through the same thing. Well, guess what? It's not like one group of lacrosse players are playing right now.
Right.
There's a pause button. So you have to understand when the lights come on, there's going to be that transitional phase that we all have to go through. And look, there might be kids that get gobbled up right away, but everyone's going to be patient too. Like if you're a 2022 and this summer was supposed to be like the big summer for you,
yeah.
I venture to say that there's going to be a ton of 2022 recruits getting recruited next summer. Because think about it. If you're a college coach, outside of the absolute slam dunk that you see, that's a complete outlier. Maybe there's a handful of them nationally.
1 to 2%.
All of these kids didn't play spring lacrosse. And if they don't play summer lacrosse, are you really going to make decisions in the fall when maybe half of them are playing football or another fall sport? You're going to have to kind of push this back almost a year for that group. And the college coaches are going to be patient and are going to want to push it back because they now have decisions with college players who are playing another year of eligibility. So, like, there's a lot of pieces where I think decisions are going to be made later because they don't want to make every decision on a recruit, because with all of the way that the college game is and how fluid it is right now, you don't want to make too many definitive decisions about something down the road 3 years when, you might want that kid who's playing at another school who has a 5th year and can't play at that other school, whether it's the Ivy League or the Patriot League. Like, there's going to be players in those leagues that want to go somewhere else. So there's so much movement that I think that these college coaches, and I don't speak for any of them, but I think a lot of them are going to be patient because of everything that's taken place on the college front and the high school front.
Well, 2 weeks ago we had John Danowski on, and Coach D is the best. And then today you saw the news that Michael Sowers is going to be leaving Princeton and going to Duke.
Exactly.
What a huge ad for Duke right there.
Yeah, look, Michael Sowers is an exceptional player. Like, from a sudden twitch perspective at the attack position, the only guy that I've seen that just is that explosive and sudden was Mikey Powell. Like, I think this kid is phenomenal. He's got amazing vision, and he's Princeton's all-time leading scorer before the season even started this year.
I watched the first 3 games.
Yeah, in 3 years, he was the all-time leading scorer. And all those guys that he beat essentially had 5 years of lacrosse, because all of them played well into May every single year. So if you play 4 extra games a year over
all those
4
national
years,
championships,
that's another season. Sowers never played in the playoffs once. So he was playing with 3 years of statistics against essentially like 5, right?
Yeah.
So he's an amazing talent. But I'll tell you, like every so often there's a kid that I get to know, on a deeper level. And, you get to know the kid, you get introduced to his mom or his dad. Connor Fields was one a few years ago that I just really connected with, who I thought was an awesome kid. And in this class, like Grant Ament from Penn State and Michael Sowers were kids that I really connected with, that I built a relationship over the years, and they're wonderful, and their parents are great. And like, they're so easy to root for. So like a kid like Michael Sowers, as great as he is as a player, he's like the most humble kid in the world. He's the nicest kid in the world. He's so respectful. You just want to root for a kid like that.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what? I was saying that the other day, if you give me, good kids from great families and you give me that as the starting cornerstone,
yes,
the rest is there. And that's what you're saying about Sowers is like,
he's going to change that locker room right away. I mean, he's clearly going to be the best player on the team day one. But more importantly, he's super mature. He's kind. He's a caring kid. Like, he's going to make that locker room so cool to be in.
I think if my math is right, it could be wrong, but you know what? Who cares about my math? But I think in the first 3 games of the season this year, he had 35 points. So,
yeah, I think you're right. Because one game, I think he had 15, right? Wasn't he or 14?
And then,
3 and 11 in one game.
Then in his 4th game, he only had 8 points, so his scoring average went down.
Yeah, it was a downer. But it was against Virginia. I think I did that game. He had 8 or 9 points, but like every point was like, whoa, like no one could cover the kid. Like you look at the defender guarding him, and honestly, on some of the goals he got beat, he was like, the guy's playing pretty good defense. But like, who's going to stop that?
Yeah. It's funny, as a feeder, I had the opportunity to play with Darren Lowe. And I remember one time in practice, someone dropped a pass because they just weren't ready. And Darren just said, hey, when the ball's in my stick, be ready. I'm going to put it on your stick.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of players like that. Like Tim Goldstein was another one. See, this is what you have to deal with when you're homeschooling. Say hi.
Yeah.
Hi. That's my son, Grayson. Yes, you can have it. Have another fruit roll-up. Look, this is the reality of what we're living in these days.
Well, I got dogs. I got my dog.
You could have anything swoop through at any minute.
I love it.
Yeah, so Darren Lowe comes to mind, but like a guy like Tim Goldstein was another one of those feeders.
Timmy
like,
and I be ready. Had some epic battles.
Yeah, you better be ready. And another guy that you like, for me personally, that was like that, but in a way different way, was Casey Powell. So when I played with Casey, he wasn't that traditional feeder like Darren Lowe or Tim Goldstein, who would sit behind the net and just bang it to your stick.
He would drop.
Casey was like a whirling dervish, where he'd go back and forth, and he actually was really hard to play with at first, because like he was so unpredictable that you didn't know what his next move would be. So you never like knew where to hedge, or you didn't know where to scrape or pop. And the other thing that he would do is he would make these moves in the middle of the move, like whether his stick was like here or here, he would make the pass. And I remember the fall of his freshman year, like I dropped so many of Casey's passes. I was 1 year older than him as a sophomore, just because I wasn't ready, or I wasn't even thinking pass. Like when I was at Yorktown, I played with like some great players, but they were like traditional feeders. Like you knew, like when they came out of their roll and their stick was there, and they gave a nice drop step, bam, it was right on my stick. So with Casey, it was like you tried to match what he was doing, and it was really, really difficult. And I remember dropping a bunch of passes, and eventually I figured him out, and he figured me out. But that was a big-time challenge for me.
Well, I remember the thing I love about Casey too, and Ryan and the whole family. I was covering Casey up in Lake Placid, and he was a guy where you literally could beat the crap out of him, and he wouldn't say a word, never, and he would just keep coming back. And it's like, it got to be towards the end of the game, and I'm just like, man, he just doesn't stop. He doesn't stop.
It's funny you say that, because when I had Gary on the podcast, I asked him a similar question. Like when I was growing up and watching him play, I remember one time he was playing in the Dome, and like Hopkins, literally, that's when they had aluminum shafts. They were breaking shafts on the gates' backs like they were like Slim Jims, just popping. And 6 or 7 shafts on these guys. and hard checks. And every single person that played against Gary Gait or Paul Gait, like mission number one was to hurt these guys, right? Go at them and make them feel it. Do you know, in all my years watching Gary and Paul Gait, I've never seen them retaliate once.
Yeah.
It's the same with the Powells, and it's the same with the Thompsons. So think of those names. Like, if you're a young kid and you aspire to be great, watch the Gates, watch the Powells, watch the Thompsons. Never did they retaliate. Never did they cheap shot. Never did they talk smack. I mean, they have the utmost respect for the game. And, like, the competitors in which they compete against, those people, just by watching them, man, like, the amount of respect that you have for a guy like that, like, it's different. Like, you could be the greatest in the world, but if you keep talking and, like, you know, you're chirping all the time, you lose some of that, like, stature.
Not any of them. And you said
No.
all three of them. And you know what, too? Like, Gary was playing with us one time in Placid, and he jumped off of the first midfield line because we had a guy, Jimmy Mormile, at the time from Brown.
I remember Jimmy, yeah.
Jimmy was just tearing it up, and he was having literally the tournament of his life. And he just said, hey, this kid's on fire. Move him up to the first midfield line. I'll play on the second midfield line. I was like, Gary Gait just moved himself to the second midfield. And we won the championship that year, which we had never won before. You know, that's the type of guy that he is.
100%.
Yeah, he's awesome. You know, as we're talking about Lax here, we might as well get into it. And once again, I don't ask any of the guests questions beforehand, so they don't know what's coming at you. So
I like that anyway. And to be honest with you, I think it's more authentic and organic that way.
Yeah, I love it. So let's do this. I'm going to give you draft picks right now, okay? You only get one draft pick at each position. You're going to draft your ultimate team. So you only get one attackman, one midfielder, one defenseman, one goalie. I'll give you a face-off guy and a long pole. That's it. That's got to be your dream team. So who's your number one attackman?
That one's easy for me. It's Mike Powell. I just watched the way he played. You know, multiple national championships,
four-time All-American,
four-time Turnbull Award winner for National Attackman of the Year, but also the way he played too. Just so dynamic, and his vision was just unparalleled. He had it all, man. Like, that's a no-brainer for me.
Yeah. Okay. So midfield.
Next question.
Gary
Gait. Yeah.
I'm gonna assume on defense.
Next question. Dave Petromala.
Who's your goalie?
Wow, this one's hard.
It is hard because I was thinking about it too, and I'm like, that's a tough one.
You know what? Like, I think of like 5 or 6 guys, like Sal Licassio's in that mix and Larry Quinn's in that mix. There's so many great ones. But because of if this is my team, I also want some character back there. I'm gonna have Brian Doherty.
I knew you were gonna say it.
I just feel like I want that guy. Like I want the guy who's, you know, he shows up, you know, maybe he's a little bit out of shape, he's sweating and he's a mess, but like he's talking, he's a coach on the field, he's talking a little smack. We talk about not talking smack, but one position you can talk smack is goalie. Like, I'm okay with the goalies talking smack. They're the lunatics who are getting hit with that ball, so they deserve that up.
Nicky Polanco almost killed him in an MLL game because he was talking smack.
Yeah.
But that's a good pick. You know, for me, it's funny because in my 4 years at Brown, there were only 2 teams who we never beat. We went 0-4 against Cornell and 0-4 against UMass. And they had Schmoller in goal and they had Lacasio in goal. Yeah. And then in the North-South game, they were my 2 goalies. And I'm like, okay, I think we have a good chance of winning this game with those 2 in goal. You know, those 2 are just unbelievable. And Schmalls and Sal, just great guys as well. Who's your face-off guy?
Trevor Baptiste. I mean, the only face-off man in NCAA history to be a first-team All-American 4 times. And he's a funny guy, too. I want him in my locker room. I love Trevor. He's a character.
He is. He's a beast, no doubt about it. And who's your long pole?
My long pole, you know, I'm going to throw some old school guys. You probably remember Steve Mitchell, right? I have to think of him.
Steve and I played together for New York AC many years.
Yeah, he was unbelievable. And, you know, Joel White for Syracuse was crazy. But I'm going to throw a name at you. You probably played against him in some tournament, but just different, man. Just so good. Steve Kisslinger.
Kiss and I are good friends. I love the Kiss.
Yeah, I mean,
He,
how good was he? From a
a
takeaway
freak,
stand, he might be
a
the best
freak,
takeaway player of all time.
absolute freak. We played
Yeah,
against him when he finally ended up at Adelphi,
yeah.
and
See,
absolute freak on the field. And it's funny because there was another guy on the team at that time. Oh my God, Timmy Pratt.
yeah,
Who Timmy Pratt was maybe 5'9", and Timmy
yeah.
Pratt threw checks like Kissinger. He would literally go over your head, and the two of them just run around the field like lunatics.
Oh my God,
Um,
you probably didn't think I was going to pick Kissinger, did you?
no, I thought you were going to pick Brody Merrill.
Oh man, I feel like I just disrespected Brody Merrill. Yeah. Uh, See, you know what? Like, I don't look at Brody though as an LSM. I look at Brody as a close guy. Like, I know he's played both, but he to me he's the second best defender. My top three defenders of all time are Dave Petramala, Brody Merrill, and Pat McCabe. And
Yeah,
Pat McCabe is Captain
listen, come
America,
on.
man. He's the best leader. He's unbelievable. Like, I want that guy on my team every single day. Those are the three best defenders. So I've kind of always looked as Brody as a field general. Now he's interesting. Like, he plays close more on the one-on-one matchups, but he's played the wing so much.
Yeah,
I mean, if you told me he was an LSM, he's beating out Kiss, but I kind of pegged him as a close guy because if you look at Brody's best play, he's kind of plays as a close defenseman in the middle of the defense as like a free safety.
yeah, he does. He does. But I'll tell you, there's so many to pick from, but it's just a fun little exercise that we go through. And
I'm gonna have some problems though, like the extracurricular activities between Doherty and Kisslinger. Like,
yeah,
I'm gonna need some guys.
you might need security. You might need
Yes.
security on that team. I could definitely see that. And by the way, so what are you doing for your haircuts? One of the things, for those people who don't know, did you do it yourself?
No, well, here's the deal. I've been
But
cutting hair
Clark
since
gives everyone, he
Yeah.
does an interview and he gives everyone haircuts.
Yeah, I've been cutting hair since I'm in 5th grade. I've cut thousands of heads. Like, all my friends in high school, college, used to cut them all. So I actually don't cut my hair. I have a barber in the next town over. His name's Jose. He's a Dominican barber, and he's my boy, and he's great, man. The Dominican barbers are like, they know how to cut hair like Italians know how to make pasta, right? So
See,
like,
we have all Russian barbers on Long Island.
yeah,
All
well,
Russian.
yeah, we have some Dominicans, and he's my boy. But obviously, because of the shutdown and social distancing, I like to have a little longer hair at top, but just wasn't working for me. So I kind of walked my wife and my 10-year-old daughter through how to fade, and they've been doing it for me every 2 weeks.
Well,
It's been fun.
my daughter cut mine with the buzzer.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, mine's pretty
she
tight.
left the top long.
Yeah,
I said, leave the top, just do the sides.
yeah.
So
yeah.
I had to. It was killing me. Also, big news today in the lacrosse world is Hopkins named a brand new head coach in Peter Millman. Second time now that Hopkins has gone to Cornell, and they've taken the Cornell coach because they took Petro when he was at Cornell, and now they've taken Peter Millman. Big news for Hopkins.
It is. I'm not totally shocked that they went off the grid a little bit with this hire and hired a non-Hopkins guy. There's a lot of really good coaches out there that have Hopkins ties, whether they're, Sean Nadalin at Towson or Greg Raymond at Hobart or Seth Tierney at Hofstra. There's a lot. Obviously, Scott Marr, too, at Albany was the one that's, created, I think, the most buzz and has allowed players offensively to play a style and a brand, a lot like kind of Coach Simmons at Syracuse. So he was a really intriguing candidate to me as well. But I'm not shocked they went off the grid just because there's a new administration there. There's a new AD. There's a new president and provost that are all part of this decision process. And I think they wanted to, and I don't have any confirmation, but I think they wanted to have their own hire and put a stamp on it. So I'm not shocked they went that way. Peter Milliman's an interesting candidate. I think, he's got super efficient offenses. If you watch his Cornell teams play, like, great shooting percentages. They're always shooting over 40%, which is hard to do. A lot of teams shoot around 30, and you think like, oh, what's 10%? It's a lot. Like, in the big scheme of things. Puts the players in big time spots. He's been able to recruit these kids too. He's been part of that Cornell staff for a while, where you have guys like Jeff Teat and some big time players like Clark Peterson and all those guys. But to me, they went, I think, on more of his upside and the vision of what can be. Because at the end of the day, they were having a great year. They were the number 2 team in the nation. But Peter Millman's got 1 playoff win in his career. He's only been coaching as a head coach at Cornell for 3 years. So why do you go with such inexperience? Well, when you go through the process and you have a search committee and you have a hiring committee and you vet it all out, those people obviously saw something in him that they feel he can take Hopkins to that championship level. And I don't necessarily doubt that he can. I think that it's going to be very different for him coaching at Hopkins, because, you know, you're coaching at a place where there's a lot of heat. And Cornell has tremendous lacrosse tradition, but Hopkins is different. It's the one Division I sport in the school. You have an alumni base that's used to winning championships. There's a lot of pressure. It's like the Notre Dame of lacrosse. And I think he's going to have to get acclimated because he has no experience there. I think it's important for him to hire at least one Hopkins guy underneath him, just so he can kind of elbow him in the office, be like, what do we do here?
Yeah, exactly.
So that will be interesting.
What's the
to see
tradition
what he
here?
does. Yeah, what's the tradition?
I mean, the one thing I will give Pete credit for, though, is wherever he's been, he's won. As a player, as an assistant coach, you know, he's done a great job. But
I think he's going to do really well. And, you know, the people on the committee that vetted it all out were super impressed with him. And I don't doubt it. But I think he's going to have to win pretty soon just to validate that, right? Like, you know, a lot of times when you
listen, Hopkins alumni might be some of the toughest alumni.
No, they are the toughest. They are the toughest.
Expectations.
They are the toughest, and I'll tell you why. The 2 schools are Syracuse and Hopkins, but the Hopkins alum are tougher because I'm going to be honest with you. They donate more money to the program. A lot of them they're different than the Cuse alum. You know, I'm not saying the Cuse alum I'm a Cuse alum, aren't successful in business, but there's a lot of powerful business people there that make a lot of money that have made their voices heard in years past and have donated. So you know, that's the culture down there. It's not a bad thing by any stretch. My brother went to Hopkins. He's super proud. I love watching Hopkins, and I love the pageantry behind that program. It's just I feel like he's going to have to win fairly soon. And you know what? The climate of lacrosse will allow him to win. I mean, the transfer portal has never been like it is right now. In 2020, it's free agency. He can literally, in the next week, peel off 3 or 4 studs. I mean, Yale has guys that can't come back for a 5th year because of the Ivy ruling specific to the 3 schools that have declared already, Yale, Princeton, and Harvard. I mean, Jackson Morrill's grandfather and father, Mike Morrill, played at Hopkins. Like, why not go after him? How about bringing Jeff Teat with you, right? Like, think about it. Like, if you bring Jeff Teat with Joey Epstein and Jackson Morrill, and I mean, he could be relevant quickly. If he does a great job in the portal, which is free agency right now, and the portal's never been like it is now because of this 5th year and some of these Ivies not allowing the kids to come back, so they have to find a home somewhere. He could be relevant. I'll tell you the one thing that I think he'll need ASAP. I mean, I mentioned a lot of these guys like Jackson Morrill and Teague, they're phenomenal attackmen. Hopkins struggled in the midfield the last few years. When you watch them on tape, they really had very few guys.
Yeah, when
very
was
few
the last
guys
time they had that monster?
Yeah, like, they didn't scare me. They didn't scare me at the midfield. I didn't feel like honestly, like I never felt when I was watching Hopkins like, oh, man, you got to put the pole on that guy. It's like, yeah, put the pole on whoever.
Yeah, it's interesting though. But you know what's now? I heard something pretty interesting. And now I've been associated with Brown. From my playing days, I was the president of the Friends of Brown Lacrosse program. So I learned something new the other day, which is quite interesting. And we're still waiting to find out how this might work for Brown. But under the Brown charter, any student at Brown can take a 5th semester, an extra semester, a 9th semester in essence. Not a 5th year, a 9th semester.
Yeah, so how do you go back on the charter? So the way that you lay that out, if all these kids have played an 8th semester, the NCAA gives another year. Why can't that kid sit out in the fall and do his 9th semester in the spring?
I think they might be able to.
Well, why wouldn't they be able to? That seems like a ham and cheese deal.
Yeah, so it should be interesting to see what happens there. But, as we kind of, wrap this up, one thing I wanted to ask you is I always loved the Syracuse style of play. And, so my first game playing the Dome, we got blown out. Next year, we played Syracuse. and we played them on our football field because the field at Brown was literally like underwater. We played on the football field, and we had an unbelievable game. You know, it was like a 2-goal game, and played them great. And then my senior year came back. I ended up having to move up to play Gary at the midfield, and we absolutely got lit up. But it was just a style of play. You know, what was it like playing for Coach Simmons and those coaches that came up in that system? That just because Pat LaFontaine the other day, NHL Hall of Famer, he was talking about you learn to be creative when you're not being coached, when you're just allowed to play.
Yeah. Look, that's the best thing to describe Coach Simmons, and I'll put it into context for you. Coach Simmons was the best coach without question in terms of allowing players to be creative and allowing players to use their instincts and not being in a box and making decisions on the fly. Okay, the flip side of how much he did that, and I love this man. He's one of the most influential people in my life. But the flip side to it is pretty simple. When I got out of Syracuse and I was 22 and I started coaching high school lacrosse, I was absolutely clueless on the details of things. Like in terms of rising clears, I didn't know how to set those up. Like the little things, the substitution and getting a guy, getting a guy off or trapping a guy far box side as opposed to near box and all that. Like that stuff never registered because like when we did rising clears, we literally were like, okay, balance the field. If I'm here, you're just going to be there. And you just got to feel it and go with it. Coach Simmons used to say to our offense a couple things. He used to say, look, one of you 6 in a timeout have to beat your man because at the end of the day, the object is for the defense to rotate and create them to spin. So all of us, like, we're challenged, like, oh, I got to be that guy. Like, so you felt a sense of ownership, but you also felt like the ability to make plays without worrying what's going to happen next. I mean, if he says to you, one of you 6 have to make a play, like, okay, so that has to be me, the way I register. He also said to us all the time, I need 50 shots. Give me 50 shots, because if you do the math, if you're shooting in the 30% and you roll out 50 shots, you're scoring 15 goals a game. You're winning lacrosse games scoring 15 goals a game. So he didn't care how we found it. We never got yelled at. Like, I've never gotten yelled at by Coach Simmons. He said, like, why did you try that? Like, that never, ever happened. And I'll tell you also, he did little things that I felt were different than every other coach. Like, a lot of coaches would bring you in before a game and give you these rah-rah speeches. He would actually, because he was an artist and a sculptor, like, he would give us these really weird scenarios and stories. He would tell us stories about certain animals in the wilderness and this, that, and the other thing. I'm like, where is this guy going with this? And then eventually at the end, it's like, oh my God. And like, never shouted, never did anything. And you look to the player to your left and right and like, you're ready to go, like beyond belief. And then the other thing that he used to do for me that I thought was so touching, I wish more coaches did this and they were more vulnerable and they were okay with their emotions. Coach Simmons all the time, like, before a game, you're in the stretching lines with your team and you're sitting down and maybe you're stretching your hammies and you're on your butt. He would come up to you and like rub your shoulder and like whisper something in your ear. And not like, yeah, let's go. Just a little whisper. He would say something like, they came to watch you play today. Or there's a little boy in the stands who's watching you. Like little things like that. But he just would empower you and make you feel so good about yourself. Like, I couldn't tell you like how sad I was when the last game of my career was against Maryland my senior year. It happened to be the worst game of my career. It's an awful way to end, and it will always sit with me that way. But I'll never forget, towards the end of the game, Maryland had the ball. They were up by 1. And I was coming on a high. It was my senior year. I was playing well in the quarterfinals. I had a really good game at Hofstra back home where all my friends from Yorktown were there. And we beat Loyola by a goal, and I scored a bunch of goals in the second half. And it was my senior year. I was one of the 2 captains of the team. We're back to the Final Four. This is my team. And, like, I'll never forget, like, as the clock was winding down, Maryland had the ball with, like, 10 seconds left. I remember this, and I think about it, like, all the time. Just, like, I remember running down the field to get into the hole as Maryland was chewing the clock. And I looked over to the sidelines, and I could see Coach. I could see the sideline. Like, it was one of the saddest moments of my life. Without question, the saddest moment of my sports career. Just because I never wanted that to end. Like those 4 years, like if you told me I could have signed up for 8, like I used to wake up in my senior year in the fall, I'm like, oh my God, man, May's only 4 months away. Like I never like I can't wait till fall ball's over. I used to be like, this is the last fall I'm ever gonna have here. Like, so for me, that's like just the experience of how good he made me feel. Just it made me want to hold time. Like too bad, like, you know, my Syracuse lacrosse experience wasn't like in this little ball of a pause, right? Like we have a pause right now in life. I wish my Syracuse lacrosse career was on pause.
Yeah, because you have a better chance to reflect on it and say,
Yes.
what more do I want out of it? You know, and the truth is, it's to me, that's what the Elevate Academy is really all about. It's about taking, you know, all of our reflective experiences. You know, I've been an athlete my entire life, played 3 sports in college, and you know, I look at it as an opportunity to say, okay, how do I give back? How do I help the next generation of kids? So it's like the kids who are listening, listen to everything that Paul's saying about, you know, all the beautiful points that he's making. Listen as a coach, listen to the points that you're hearing from great coaches or great athletes talk about their coaches. All this stuff is a great opportunity to truly reflect on it. You know, I'm not sure, but I know that Syracuse was one of our last games my senior year, and it might have even been our senior game. And we got hammered. And I literally was walking off the field. You know, both teams run to their goalies. I'm in the defensive end. And as I'm walking off, Coach Simmons walks up to me, puts his arm around me, and said to me, he goes, "You would start for me any day of the week. I would love to have a player like you. Pick your head up."
Yeah.
And I literally
that's the way
was
he was. Yeah, but that's him to a T. Like, you know, Coach Simmons, I believe he's 84 now. So every time I'm up there calling a game, whether it's football or lacrosse, I always see him. We spend time. We go out to eat together. There's times where I drop him off back at his house, and I'll sit in his driveway with him for like 2 hours, and we'll just continue to talk. To me, he's the essence of coaching, and it's clear to me that coaching is so much more than X's and O's, man. I don't really look. Everyone knows where to slide from. Everyone knows, you know, how to run an offense with pairs and running razor picks and this, that, and the other thing. That's whatever, man. That is.
How do you empower someone to be the best that they can be?
That's all that it comes down to. He was the greatest coach I ever played for, and without question, I learned the least from him, lacrosse-wise. Without question. I didn't learn anything from him, X's and O's. He never taught me how to dodge or do these things. He had assistants that he empowered to do those things, but he's without a doubt the best coach that I've ever played for, and I learned the least.
Yeah, well, Dom Starsha was a lot like that too. I mean, Dom, you know, definitely got into the X's and O's, but, you know, Dom was all about effort and, you know, all about making plays and going to get the next ground ball. Who's going to get the next dirty ground ball? You know, but then he surrounded himself with great coaches. And, you know, Pete Lasagna. Pete was also that very cerebral, you know, type coach. And you know, Pete loved to write, and he, you know, does a lot of writing for Inside Lacrosse still on the back page. And the stuff that Pete would write to us before games, it's like, God, I wish I had every single one of those, because I just remember, like, he wrote one called The Tude, like, you know, little hash tude. And like, what was your attitude, your mindset? And I was like, wow, I remember like reading that and just like how it impacted you. And I love that. But then, you know, I've talked about it on here, you know, my football coach at Brown, he made me want to quit football because he was that rah, get in your face, scream at you, abuse you, bully you in essence, and made me hate it. And I was like, okay.
Were you at Brown playing football when Jimmy Bernhardt was there or no?
No, I
missed him by a few years. Yeah, he was coaching there. And then O'Brien was a couple of years after you, or Bill O'Brien. Yeah.
Actually, I was just with Bill last January. We had the Ivy football dinner, and it was kind of cool. Up on the stage, you had 2 head NFL coaches, both from the Ivy League.
Wow.
Which was awesome. But as we wrap this up, Paul, couple questions. One, I was going to ask you already, but you already said it. You said it without me having to ask you, is what's the silver lining in all of this? And you came out with that. So I love what you had to say about that, because that's a new question I'm going to ask everyone is, what is the silver lining? You already went over that. But Pat LaFontaine, NHL Hall of Famer. Don't know if you ever had a chance to go watch him play when you
I know
up in Buffalo. He wanted to know, what is your life going to be like in this post COVID-19? Like, what technologies and things are you going to be using differently now that just life has changed?
Well, look, what we're doing right now on Zoom. I didn't know what Zoom was 6 months ago. Like, did you?
I actually did. So
Well, you're in the cutting edge. You're an Ivy guy. I'm a Syracuse guy. So we didn't know what Zoom was. But to be honest with you, like I'm thinking about Zoom and not just from a professional standpoint. Like I've been able to connect with my Syracuse buddies, all the guys we graduated together. Like Wednesday nights, we've been doing Zooms together, and it's been fantastic. And we've been able to kind of reconnect. And I'm seeing guys jump on the screen that I haven't seen in 10, 15 years, and we're right back at it, ripping on each other and having fun. And it's classic. But I think from a professional standpoint, like I could see using Zooms for like coaches meetings. And, there's a lot of resourceful things here where, in the past we would come in early and factor in time for meetings. And, I'm hopeful that will happen. There's nothing better than in-person meetings, but I'm thinking not only from just a sports commentator coach perspective with meetings, but also like our own team, like at ESPN, like we've been Zooming together instead of calls. Yeah. And I think they've been great because sometimes they'd be like, oh, it's this over here. And I just show them, or it could be anything, but it adds a cool little element to it. Like we've always had our weekly ESPN lacrosse calls, but now we're Zooming with them. And it gives, there's something different. Like if I was talking on the phone with you right now, as much as the best would be to sit across from you and have a cup of coffee, this is better than talking on the phone.
I agree.
Right? Like you see me, you could hear me. Like when my kid actually interrupts us, like you feel it rather than like, oh, hold on a second. Get out of the room. Go. You know what I mean? Like it's okay to jump in when you see him,
Yeah, absolutely. The dogs are barking in the background. Oh, the mailman's here. So
so that's where I think there's going to be a lot of cool things and resources. We talk about silver linings, and we went over all that. But I think one of them also is just technology and utilizing it too, and being able to get some FaceTime without actually traveling all the time, or it beats a phone too. It's a little more personal.
Well, I think one thing too, especially for all the players out there, if you have a student athlete who's in high school or whatever, use this time with technology. Go watch your game film.
I say that all the time, man. For these look, this time off is pretty simple. Like to me, the kids who utilize this time and don't feel bad for themselves, but actually look at this time as a gift, they're going to widen the gap. They're going to widen the gap big time. Like I see some of these kids who are working so hard. When the lights finally do turn on, they're going to separate themselves. And it's not just physical, it's mental. And I've told some kids too, because I've jumped on some Zoom calls with high school teams where coaches asked, hey, can you be our guest this week? Absolutely. And when I sit down and I talk to them, so much of it obviously is preparing and going out there and doing certain drills with your feet or your stick, and working out and hitting the weights and doing a lot of like high intensity training. But there's this piece of me that tells me you got to capture the cerebral part of it, like break down film, watch people who play the same position as you, emulate them. If you're a righty shooting attackman, start watching film on Ryan Brown, or if you like to dodge, watch Jordan Wolf. If you're a two-way midfielder, watch guys like Brent Adams or
I love that. My
that.
daughter, and she's a coach, she actually gave her 2024, she gave them homework, and she said, you need to watch this game. You need to watch the following players at your position.
Yes.
And report back to me on what did you see them do.
Yeah, so, because look, there's a ton of time to do this. There's, other than Netflix, there's not a robust amount of live programming, as you know, with sports and stuff. So utilize that time.
Yeah. So last thing. So, once again, Elevate Academy, it's a chance for all of us to, give back to the future generations, help coaches, help leaders, who are in business. And, we're bringing on some great guests. Their next guest is George Pine. So George Pine was a football player. Comes from a family of football players. His brother Jim was an all-pro center for Tampa Bay. His dad played professional football. His grandfather played professional football. George chose not to go to professional football ranks, but he probably could have. He's a giant human being. But George recently was the president of IMG, ran all of IMG, all of the
that's a big job.
It's a big job. And he left to start his own new venture, Bruin Sports Ventures. He was also the COO of NASCAR, and he literally put NASCAR on the map because he was the one who created the Nextel Sprint Series. He brought that sponsorship deal. So George is a great guy. But what is your question to ask of George on the next show?
Well, when you mentioned George's name, the one thing I didn't know about all of his family having like those NFL ties. I do know, though, he has a son, Drew, who is a great player. I live in Ridgefield, Connecticut. He played quarterback at New Canaan. So I heard the buzz around him, and now he's at Notre Dame and playing for the Fighting Irish as a freshman.
And his nephew at Boston College. They got a long line of Pine family members.
Yeah, so my question would be, describe the different emotions in regards to your experience playing sports as opposed to the emotions watching your son play quarterback. And I say that because quarterback, you're out on an island. Like quarterback, I look at, if you're a quarterback's parent, you're basically like a goalie's parent in lacrosse, right?
My daughter played ice hockey goalie.
So if you're a goalie or a quarterback, I basically want him to describe, this is a guy who's accomplished, as you just referenced, accomplished everything in business. But you're going to hear him, I bet you, say different things in regards to the emotions of watching a son who's a quarterback. That's what I want to hear.
I guarantee you. That's a great question to him. Last thing. So this is a chance for you to share with everyone. What's the best piece of advice you've ever gotten, and who did you get it from?
I got it from my grandmother. So I'm half Italian.
First time we have a grandmother. I love it.
Yeah. You're not going to get some big football coach or something from me. So my grandmother, Bridie Sweeney from County Kerry in Ireland. So I come from an interesting background. Like my father's 100% Italian. My mom was 100% Irish, was born in England. So she came over to the States when she was young. So her side is very, very Irish. I mean, my grandparents had brogues, hardcore Irish, shillelaghs in the house, the whole nine. My father's side is as hardcore as Italian as they get. I mean, my grandfather's name's Emilio. I have uncles named Joey, Frankie, Fonzo. So, I mean, it's like in Carmine.
It's almost like growing up in East Meadow.
Yeah, exactly. No, Sunnyside, Queens. So, my Uncle Carmine had a pinky ring. So I had two extremes of the Irish and the Italian. When we got together, it was great stuff. So my grandmother, I remember when I was little, I was always like talking about someone and things they said and things they did. And we were talking about material things. I'll never forget. She was such a beautiful woman. She said to me, the way that you need to live your life is when you're gone one day, don't have people talk about things you said or things you did. Talk about how you want them to talk about how you made them feel. So that to me was the best advice I've ever, like at the end of the day, when they cart me off one day, they're not going to care that, like, I was a commentator in lacrosse for all those years, and all of the accolades or this, that, and the other thing. When someone hears my name, and I think about this all the time, the first thing they will think about is how I made them feel. And that's from my grandma Bridie.
Well, I'll tell you, you're doing a great job of it, especially with your podcast, because they're just engaging and they definitely draw you in. So listen, we have a chance to elevate each other. Paul, thanks for elevating us today. This has been phenomenal. So this is the Elevate Academy. We'll catch you on Wednesday with George Pine. And Paul, once again, this has been awesome. It's nice to be able to flip the script. You're usually an interviewer.
No, I like that too. It's engaging, and look, self-reflection. And sometimes when people ask you questions, it allows you not only to answer the questions, but when you step away, you think more, right? Because you said things and you want to see those things through, or you think about the certain processes that go along with your answers. So I find it rewarding, and I'm grateful for that. So thank you.
Hey, keep doing what you're doing, bud. Great to have you on. I appreciate your time. Thanks so much. Keep elevating, everybody. See you guys soon.